On December 29, 1890, at Wounded Knee, over 250 Sioux women, children, and elders were massacred in the freezing cold, yet their story didn't end there. Despite centuries of betrayal, war, and loss, the Sioux people's resilience has defied the odds. From the Mississippi Valley to the blood-stained snow of Wounded Knee, their journey is one of power, defiance, and unbreakable spirit. Through tragedy, they become a global symbol of resilience, inspiring countless others. How did they turn pain into triumph? Let's explore. The rise of a great nation for centuries, the Sioux ruled the vast lands of North America, their influence stretching from the Mississippi Valley to the Great Plains. Their history, rich with culture, warfare, and survival, is a testament to their strength. Today, their descendants, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, continue to honor their ancestors' legacy. But how did the Sioux rise to power? And how have their traditions endured through centuries of struggle? The formation of the Sioux Nation. The Sioux, one of the largest and oldest Native American tribes, trace their origins back 2,000 to 3,000 years. Their ancestors thrived in the fertile woodlands of the Mississippi Valley, where they lived in harmony with nature, hunting, fishing, and cultivating wild rice. By 800 AD, they began migrating northward, settling in the dense forests of Minnesota and Wisconsin. But what forced them to leave their ancestral lands and venture into the unknown? By 1300 AD, the Sioux had formed the Seven Council Fires, a confederation of 7 bands united by kinship, language, and geography. Each band had its own identity, but was bound by shared traditions. The 3 largest divisions, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, all used the same word for their identity, friend or ally, reflecting their deep cultural ties. Culture and spiritual beliefs. The Sioux spirituality was deeply woven into their way of life, centering on nature, animals, and the Great Spirit Wakantanka. Their beliefs shaped their daily actions and guided their decisions. One of their most sacred legends is that of the White Buffalo Calf Woman, a divine figure who brought them the sacred pipe and taught them the 7 sacred rites. Among these, the Sun Dance was a powerful ceremony of sacrifice and renewal, strengthening their connection to the Great Spirit and their community. But how did these spiritual traditions help the Sioux endure the challenges that lay ahead? Life before European contact. Before encountering Europeans, the Sioux lived in settled villages, with the Dakota farming near Lake Superior, growing corn and beans while hunting and fishing. In Sioux society, roles were clear. Men hunted and fought, women managed camps and crafted tools, and elders passed down traditions. Children learned from their community, preparing for their future roles. In the 1700s, conflict with the Ojibwa forced many Dakota to migrate south and west. This led the Lakota and Nakota to the Great Plains, where they discovered the buffalo, which became central to their way of life. With horses, they became skilled buffalo hunters, adopting a nomadic lifestyle. They lived in teepees, wore buffalo hide clothing, and competed with tribes like the Mandan and Crow for hunting grounds. As the Sioux adapted to their new life on the Great Plains, another significant change was on the horizon: their first encounter with Europeans, which would forever alter their way of life. But their world was about to change forever with the arrival of the Europeans. First contact with Europeans and the fur trade. The Sioux first encountered Europeans in the late 1600s, when French fur traders arrived in their territory. They quickly became involved in the fur trade, exchanging buffalo hides for European goods like guns, metal, tools, and cloth. While trade brought new opportunities, it also led to conflict. In 1679, the Sioux briefly allied with the Ojibwa to control trade routes, but by 1736, their rivalry reignited into a century-long war. This ongoing conflict reshaped regional power dynamics, further entrenching European influence. But how would the Sioux navigate this new world of alliances and betrayals? Westward expansion and broken promises. The 1800s ushered in a new threat: American westward expansion. As settlers pushed into Sioux lands, tension over resources grew. The U.S. government attempted to negotiate peace through treaties, including the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, which granted the Sioux control over their lands in exchange for safe passage for settlers. However, as more settlers arrived, the government failed to uphold its promises, leading to widespread distrust among the Sioux. But the treaties were often broken. In 1854, a minor dispute over a stray cow escalated into the Grattan Massacre, where Lieutenant John Grattan and his men attacked a Sioux village, sparking violent retaliation. This incident set off years of bloodshed between the Sioux and U.S. forces. In 1862, frustration over broken treaties, delayed annuity payments, and starvation led to the Dakota Uprising in Minnesota, led by Chief Little Crow. The rebellion resulted in hundreds of deaths before the U.S. military crushed it. In the aftermath, 38 Dakota warriors were hanged in Mankato, marking the largest mass execution in U.S. history. How could the Sioux survive in the face of such overwhelming betrayal? Through resilience, unity, and resistance, they fought to protect their lands, culture, and way of life. Red Cloud's War and the Battle of Little Bighorn by the 1860s, gold discoveries in Montana drew settlers and the U.S. military into Sioux lands. In response, Red Cloud, a Lakota leader, launched Red Cloud's War 1866 to 1868, a fierce resistance campaign. His warriors successfully drove U.S. forces from the Bozeman Trail, forcing the government to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1868. This treaty granted the Sioux control over the Black Hills, a sacred land central to their culture and spirituality. However, in 1874, gold was discovered in the Black Hills, and the U.S. violated the treaty, sending miners and soldiers into Sioux territory. This sparked the Great Sioux War, 1876 to 1877. Led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, the Sioux achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Little Bighorn, annihilating General Custer's 7th Cavalry. The battle took place on June 25, 1876, when Custer, underestimating the strength of the Sioux and their Cheyenne allies, launched a direct attack on their encampment. He divided his forces, hoping for a quick and decisive strike, but the warriors, numbering over 2,000, quickly overwhelmed his troops. Crazy Horse led a fierce charge, encircling Custer's men and cutting off their escape. Within hours, Custer and over 200 of his soldiers lay dead. Despite this triumph, the U.S. retaliated with overwhelming force, hunting down Sioux leaders and forcing their surrender. Their momentous victory was short-lived, but their spirit remained unbroken. The tragedy of Wounded Knee. By 1890, the Sioux were desperate. Their lands were gone, their way of life destroyed. In their darkest hour, they turned to the ghost dance, a spiritual movement promising the return of the buffalo and the expulsion of white settlers. To the Sioux, it was hope. To the U.S. government, it was a threat. In December 1890, tensions exploded. Sitting Bull, the revered Sioux leader, was killed during an attempt to arrest him. 2 weeks later, the U.S. Army surrounded a group of Sioux, mostly women, children, and elderly men at Wounded Knee Creek. The Sioux were exhausted, starving, and unarmed. A single shot rang out its origin, still unclear, and chaos erupted. The soldiers opened fire, cutting down the Sioux as they tried to flee. Machine guns tore through their ranks, leaving no chance for escape. By the end, over 250 Sioux lay dead, their bodies scattered across the snow. The wounded were left to freeze in the bitter cold, and the survivors were forever scarred by the horror. Wounded Knee was not a battle, it was a massacre. It marked the end of armed Sioux resistance and became a symbol of betrayal and resilience. Today, it stands as a stark reminder of the cost of survival and the unbreakable spirit of the Sioux, who continue to honor the memory of those lost. But how did the Sioux rise from the ashes of such tragedy? The Sioux in the 20th and 21st century. Despite centuries of hardship, the Sioux have endured. In the 20th century, the U.S. government forced Sioux children into boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their language or practice their traditions. But the Sioux resisted, keeping their culture alive through storytelling, ceremonies, and activism. In recent decades, the Sioux have fought tirelessly for their land and rights. The Standing Rock protests 2016 to 2017 against the Dakota Access Pipeline brought global attention to their struggle. Legal battles over the Black Hills, which the U.S. government seized, despite the 1868 treaty, continue to this day. Through each battle and every challenge, the Sioux have remained steadfast, carrying the strength of their ancestors into the modern era. A legacy that lives on the Sioux story is not just one of loss, but of unbreakable resilience. Their deep connection to the land, their warrior spirit, and their commitment to preserving their heritage remains strong. As long as the Black Hills stand, so too will the spirit of the Sioux, reminding the world that their fight for justice is far from over.